In the year 2774, humanity stood at a crossroads, its future intertwined with the fragile alliances of the Galactic Accord. For centuries, Earth had played its part, a respected but often overlooked member in a vast network of advanced civilizations. Humans were known for their adaptability, their resilience, and their knack for making things work when others couldn't. Yet, despite their quiet contributions, they were always seen as the underdogs, a young species in a galaxy full of ancient powers. At the heart of the Accord, there was a delicate balance. It was a union of species bound by trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, and a shared vision for galactic peace. For the most part, humanity had thrived within this system. They weren't the largest empire or the oldest species, but they were dependable. The humans provided resources to struggling worlds, helped to mediate disputes, and offered technologies that were simple but effective. In return, they enjoyed trade routes, technology exchanges, and the protection of the Accord. But all that changed the day the Accord turned its back on them. It came without warning. A sudden, calculated move that shocked humanity to its core. Earth, once a valued member of the Accord, was suddenly cut off from vital trade routes. Sanctions were imposed, trade deals dissolved, and a series of increasingly hostile resolutions were passed by the Galactic Council. The excuse: a fabricated charge of undermining galactic unity. The truth, however, was far darker. For years, a faction of powerful species within the Accord had been plotting to marginalize humanity. They saw the humans as a rising threat, not in terms of military might, but in their potential to outpace the older civilizations through innovation and resourcefulness. Earth's rapid technological advancements had begun to disrupt the economic and political balance. The humans were not content to remain in the shadows, quietly assisting others. They had dreams of building their own future, of becoming an independent force in the galaxy, and that was something the old powers of the Accord could not tolerate. The first sign of betrayal came during the annual Accord Summit, where leaders from across the galaxy gathered to discuss policy. A subtle shift took place, one that no one noticed until it was too late. The humans were given a vague excuse for the sanctions, a legal loophole designed to humiliate them. It was an act of political theater, meant to strip away Earth's voice in the galaxy. At first, humanity responded with confusion. Their diplomats scrambled to present evidence of the lies and distortions used to justify the sanctions. The human ambassadors tried to reason with their counterparts, but the response was cold, dismissive. The galaxy's oldest species stood united, their decision made. The humans were no longer welcome in the fold. In the face of such a betrayal, humanity did not break. There was no explosion of rage, no desperate cry for mercy. Instead, a quiet resolve settled over Earth. The humans knew they had been crossed, but they also understood the truth. This was not the end. This was merely the beginning. They began to retreat, but not in defeat. They vanished into the depths of the galaxy, as if they had never existed. The Accord, believing they had won, never realized that humanity was not gone. It was simply preparing. And so, the galaxy waited. Time passed, and the Accord carried on, unknowing of the storm that was about to rise from the ashes of their mistake. For decades, there was nothing. No broadcasts, no messages, no word from Earth. The galaxy moved on, its focus shifting away from the human species. Earth, once a vital hub of commerce and diplomacy, became little more than a distant memory. The Accord spoke little of the humans, dismissing them as a bygone relic of the past. To the other species, the sudden silence was a relief, a confirmation that the human problem had been resolved. The Council's betrayal had been swift and clean, and in their arrogance, they believed it had succeeded. Without a voice in the Accord, humanity was believed to have fallen into obscurity. The once bustling trade routes, once filled with ships from Earth, were now eerily quiet. The great human colonies on distant planets were erased from the star maps, and Earth itself became a forgotten world, an afterthought. But on Earth, nothing had been forgotten. Humanity did not crumble under the weight of isolation. They did not fall into despair. Instead, they turned inward, silently working, quietly rebuilding what the galaxy had taken from them. The people of Earth understood that the galaxy was vast, and their isolation was merely temporary. In the silence, they did not mourn their losses. They planned their return. The human leadership, though small in numbers after decades of cuts, had gathered in secret. The world's brightest minds, the best engineers, the unsung heroes of their society, pooled their knowledge to create what would be their salvation. Technology once thought impossible was brought to life. A new generation of spacecraft was constructed, ships capable of traveling through dimensions and bending the laws of physics. It was not the raw firepower that other galactic species had relied upon. It was something far more dangerous: creativity. In the quiet laboratories and hidden facilities, humans were developing faster-than-light travel systems, quantum computers that could predict the future, and shields that could absorb the most powerful energy blasts. But they were not simply building technology. They were building a future where they would be free from the chokehold of the galactic powers that sought to suppress them. For the rest of the galaxy, the long silence was not just a sign of humanity's defeat. It was a comfortable assumption that Earth was no longer a threat. Over time, this belief became gospel. News outlets began running stories about the decline of Earth, speculating about the cause of their collapse. Was it internal strife? Did humanity destroy itself? Some even joked that humanity had gone extinct, that the universe would never again hear from the once proud species. But all the while, humanity was watching. In the quiet of their isolation, humans studied the galaxy, learning from the mistakes of others. They watched as the Accord faltered, as empires rose and fell, as alliances cracked and shattered. They watched as the galaxy's largest powers, content in their complacency, failed to evolve. And in the deepest corners of space, humanity waited for the right moment. They knew that when they returned, it would not be with an army. It would not be with weapons alone. They would return as the architects of a new way forward, one that would show the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of. The long silence was coming to an end. The galaxy had forgotten them, but humanity had never forgotten the stars. While the galaxy slept, thinking humanity was gone, Earth was far from idle. Humanity had learned the painful lessons of betrayal, but they also understood something deeper. They would never rely on the old systems again. The galaxy had cast them aside, but that didn't mean humanity's ambition had been extinguished. It was merely waiting for the right time to rise again. In secret, humanity began its greatest project yet. Across remote star systems, in forgotten sectors far beyond the reaches of the Galactic Accord, human colonies began to thrive in the shadows. These colonies were hidden, not just in distant corners of the galaxy, but in places where no one thought to look: deep nebulae, asteroid fields, and even inside the vast, uncharted voids between galaxies. Humanity was spreading, quietly, subtly, building the foundation of a new era. The technologies they were developing were nothing short of revolutionary. By combining the best of human ingenuity with a deeper understanding of the universe's most fundamental forces, humanity unlocked new realms of science. Faster-than-light travel became a reality, and not just a theoretical concept. Human ships were now capable of slipping between dimensions, traveling through warps in space-time that other species couldn't even comprehend. These ships could move with lightning speed, unaffected by the same limitations that had once held humanity back. But the greatest advancements lay in the realms of artificial intelligence and quantum manipulation. Humans had developed sentient machines, not machines designed to obey, but to think and create alongside their human counterparts. These machines could design and construct complex systems, process massive amounts of data, and predict events with an accuracy that defied belief. What was once science fiction was now humanity's everyday reality. The most remarkable part of this hidden rebirth was the human spirit. There was no fear, no bitterness. Humanity was not rebuilding for revenge. They were rebuilding to ensure that they would never again be taken for granted. They didn't need the approval of the galactic powers. They needed only the will to move forward, to create, to inspire. Every day, every new discovery, every success was another step toward reasserting humanity's place among the stars. The colonies were small at first. Just a few thousand people here, a handful of engineers and scientists there. But they were growing, quickly and quietly. Every new generation born into these secret colonies carried with it the knowledge and values of the human race. Values of independence, innovation, and perseverance. They weren't just surviving. They were thriving, and their influence was spreading. Meanwhile, the rest of the galaxy continued as if nothing had changed. The galactic powers of the Accord went about their business, secure in the belief that humanity had been eliminated from the equation. The isolationists, the bureaucrats, and the imperialists all shared a common narrative. Humanity was finished, a footnote in the history of the galaxy. They had no idea that, in the depths of space, a new chapter of human history was being written, one that would change everything. And then came the first sign that humanity was no longer hidden. It started small. A few ships that appeared out of nowhere, ships that shouldn't have been able to navigate the space they were in. Strange transmissions began to be intercepted, encrypted signals carrying human-made code. The Accord's intelligence agencies were baffled. The galaxy's most powerful empires laughed off the anomaly, attributing it to a glitch or a rogue signal from a lost colony. What they didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Humanity was no longer a shadow. They were rising. The silence in the council hall stretched, palpable and heavy, as all eyes turned to Ambassador Hart. She had spoken her truth, and now the weight of her words hung in the air like a challenge, impossible to ignore. The council had expected defiance, perhaps even anger. Instead, they had been met with calm, unyielding resolve, and it shook them to their core. High Arbiter Sorath's claws twitched, betraying a moment of hesitation. He was not used to being questioned, much less refused. In all his years of dealing with the countless species that had come to the council, none had ever responded with such quiet finality. For a long moment he said nothing. The other counselors, their voices lost in the wind of their own thoughts, remained silent as well. The words they had prepared, the offers of control, of peace at a price, seemed inadequate in the face of this human ambassador's certainty. And then, without warning, Sorath spoke again. His voice was lower this time, edged with the first true hint of tension. Humanity's refusal to compromise is noted, he said, his tone softer, yet still carrying the full weight of authority. But be warned, Ambassador. The galaxy has a way of adjusting to those who refuse to fall in line. We have seen races burn out, their bright stars snuffed by the inevitable pressures of time and space. Your species, no matter how impressive, is still fragile. There was a moment of stillness, and for a fleeting instant, it seemed as though Hart might flinch. But instead, she stood taller, her gaze fixed unwaveringly on the Arbiter. When she spoke again, it was not with the voice of an advocate seeking approval, but with the quiet authority of someone who had already made her decision. "We are not fragile," she said, her words clear and firm, "and we are not afraid of change." A shiver ran through the room, a collective exhale that seemed to ripple through the chamber's crystal walls. Humanity had not come to the table seeking the Council's favor. They had not come to negotiate their place in the galaxy. They had come to declare that they would walk their own path, no matter how treacherous or uncertain that path might be. "The galaxy has changed because of us," Hart continued, her voice steady. "And if you cannot see that, then perhaps it is you who are fragile." The room fell into another stunned silence. The delegation from the Cell Confederacy X the galaxy had long grown complacent, believing that humanity's silence was synonymous with extinction. But the first sign of humanity's return came not with violence, but with a quiet, undeniable force that rippled across the galaxy. The humans had never intended to announce their return with a bang. They were much more subtle, much more strategic. Their reemergence would not be heralded by warships or declarations. It would come as a whisper, and that whisper would grow louder with each passing moment. It began with a single, seemingly inconsequential event: the sudden appearance of a human-built station, deep within uncharted space. The Accord had long since written off the region as an empty void, unworthy of exploration. Yet there it was, a massive, gleaming structure, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. The station was equipped with technology far beyond anything in the Accord's possession. Shields that shimmered with an otherworldly energy, propulsion systems that defied the laws of physics, and a stark, utilitarian design that screamed of human ingenuity. When an Accord exploration team stumbled upon the station, they were initially puzzled. The station was not broadcasting any signal, nor was it responding to their attempts to make contact. At first, they assumed it was abandoned, just another ghost in the void. But as their ship drew closer, something peculiar happened. The station came alive. Lights flickered across its surface, a soft hum resonated from within. And then, without warning, a message appeared across the communication channels. It was human, unmistakably so. The transmission was simple, unassuming, but it carried an undeniable weight. "We've returned. We've been watching." The Accord explorers were stunned. This was no accident, no ancient relic of a long-dead civilization. This was humanity, and they were alive, thriving, and not at all what the galaxy had expected. Word spread quickly throughout the Accord, though the higher-ups were quick to dismiss it as a minor anomaly, a brief hiccup in their surveillance systems. But the truth was undeniable. Humanity had not only survived, it had quietly surpassed everything the Accord had believed was possible. The message was clear. Humanity was not gone. Humanity was watching. And humanity had been preparing. But the station was just the beginning. Within weeks, strange phenomena began to appear throughout the galaxy. Human ships, sleek and graceful, began to surface in areas once thought unreachable. Some appeared in the farthest reaches of space, slipping through asteroid fields and nebula with ease. Others seemed to materialize in the heart of major galactic trade routes, silently observing from the shadows. There was no confrontation, no immediate threat. The human ships did not fire upon anyone or demand anything. They simply existed, silently making their presence known. They were everywhere and nowhere, invisible yet undeniable. The galaxy had not seen this kind of technological mastery before, and the sheer fact that humanity had managed to develop such power in the shadows was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. For the first time in decades, the galaxy began to question the true nature of the humans they had so carelessly cast aside. Were they still the naive, fragile species they once were? Or had humanity evolved into something greater, something that had the power to shift the balance of the entire galaxy? The message sent to the Accord was simple, but it carried an enormous weight. We were never gone. We were just waiting. It was a warning, subtle, but unmistakable. Humanity had crossed the line once, and now the consequences of that betrayal would be felt in ways no one could predict. The galaxy's complacency would soon prove to be its greatest mistake. Anged a quick glance, the weight of the words clearly affecting them. The Varn representative seemed to stiffen, clearly unnerved by the challenge. Even the Sirathi, who had always prided themselves on their cautious wisdom, exchanged quiet murmurs. This was no longer a simple matter of human expansion. This was something more. This was a species that had arrived not to fit into the galaxy, but to reshape it in their image. The time of old alliances, of silent submission to the rules of the past, is over, Hart said, her eyes locking with each delegate in turn. We will not be bent by your terms. We will not be controlled. You asked us to fall in line, but humanity has never fallen in line. And we will not start now. And with that, the silence deepened, the tension building like a storm on the horizon. The Council had offered their ultimatum, and humanity, in its quiet, defiant strength, had responded with a voice that reverberated through the stars. The galaxy would never be the same. As the human ships continued to appear across the galaxy, the balance of power began to shift in ways no one had anticipated. The once untouchable empires of the Galactic Accord, whose leaders had written off humanity as a lost cause, suddenly found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew. The galaxy had changed, and the humans, though silent, were undeniably at the center of it. The first signs of real trouble came when several smaller galactic powers, previously loyal to the Accord, began to sever ties. These were the fringe worlds, those whose survival depended on the stability of the galactic order. They were the ones who had benefited most from humanity's technology, medical advances, agricultural innovations, and energy solutions, and they had not forgotten how humanity had helped them in times of need. But it wasn't just a sense of gratitude that drove them to cut ties with the Accord. It was fear. Whispers began to circulate in the corridors of power across the galaxy. Humanity has returned, and they're stronger than ever. Some of the more ambitious leaders on the fringes saw this as an opportunity to break free from the old empires that had long controlled their fates. They looked to humanity not as a threat, but as a symbol of what was possible. The old powers of the Accord, content to rest on their laurels, failed to see the signs until it was too late. The breakaway worlds sent messages to the human colonies in secret, inviting them to share their advancements, their knowledge. In return, they pledged their loyalty to the new order humanity would bring. What the galaxy's ruling empires failed to understand was that humanity was not just about survival. They were innovators, creators, people who believed in a better way, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And now, they had a growing army of allies. The reaction from the Accord's leadership was swift and predictable. They condemned the breakaway worlds as traitors and sent fleets to reassert control. But those fleets were met not with resistance, but with unity. The breakaway systems, now aligned with humanity, opened their own trade routes, established new communications networks, and began to share the technological wonders humanity had developed in secret. The result was immediate. Entire trade routes shifted. The economy of the Accord began to fray as the new alliance between humanity and the breakaway worlds thrived. The once great empires, built on old power structures and political maneuvering, began to crumble. It wasn't that humanity sought conquest. No, they were much smarter than that. They didn't need to fight for control. They had already won, simply by being the architects of a new way forward. While the Accord's leaders scrambled to reassert their dominance, they quickly realized that they had no power over the newly formed coalition. The human presence in the galaxy was no longer hidden, and the influence they wielded wasn't through force or terror. It was through the undeniable power of innovation and unity. Technology that had once been exclusive to the elite was now freely shared with the most vulnerable worlds. The human legacy was one of hope, empowerment, and possibility. And those who had once rejected humanity found themselves scrambling to catch up. What the Accord never realized was that it wasn't just humanity that had been overlooked. It was the people who had been ignored, forgotten, or oppressed by the old galactic order. And those people, now standing beside humanity, were not going to return to the way things had been. The old powers had lost their grip on the galaxy, and the new era, the one humanity had quietly ushered in, was only beginning. As the coalition of humanity and the breakaway worlds grew stronger, the remaining empires of the Galactic Accord could no longer ignore the rising tide. They had underestimated humanity for too long, assuming that their silence was defeat, that their retreat into the shadows was a sign of weakness. But the human alliance was no longer a quiet rebellion. It was a force that could no longer be contained. The Council of the Accord, once a symbol of unity and strength, now found itself fractured. The once loyal systems began to question the legitimacy of the decisions made by the central leadership. The galaxy's oldest and most powerful empires, built on centuries of tradition and control, had been blind to the new order humanity was creating. And now they were paying the price. The truth was simple. Humanity had been right all along. Their ideals of self-reliance, freedom, and innovation had proven to be the future, while the old guard of the Accord had clung to stagnation, dogma, and power for power's sake. In the heart of the Accord, a desperate call for a summit was issued. The galaxy's most powerful leaders convened, all hoping to find a way to counter the momentum humanity had gained. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. But there was no grand strategy to put humanity back in its place, no plans to undo the technological marvels humanity had introduced, or to recapture the loyalty of the systems that had defected. The galaxy's leaders were forced to face a painful reality. They had lost control, and the reckoning had come. Humanity's representatives, a group of seasoned diplomats, engineers, and scientists, sat in the chambers of the summit, prepared to lay bare the facts. The Accord leaders, once confident in their position, were now visibly shaken. The meeting that followed was not the negotiation they had hoped for. Humanity did not beg for forgiveness or demand revenge. They simply presented the truth. Their message was clear, simple, and damning. They showed the records of broken treaties, the lies, the manipulation, and the exploitation that had led to Earth's isolation. The humans did not shy away from their past mistakes, but they also did not allow the galaxy's leaders to forget their own complicity in the betrayal. With cold clarity, they outlined the future, a future where the galactic powers would no longer be able to oppress those who did not fit their narrow vision of what the galaxy should be. The humans' vision was broader. It was one of mutual respect, cooperation, and progress. But if the old powers were unwilling to join that vision, humanity was prepared to leave them behind. The meeting ended in tense silence. No one had expected the humans to approach the summit with such grace and logic. They were not asking for forgiveness. They were simply asking for the opportunity to build a new future, one that included everyone. The response from the Accord was predictable. They issued an ultimatum, demanding that humanity return to the fold and submit to the old ways. But humanity had learned long ago that submission was not the path to peace. It was the path to destruction. The Accord's leaders had underestimated the resilience of the human spirit, and they were now facing the consequences of that mistake. Humanity's message was not just a warning. It was a promise. The reckoning had begun, and there was no turning back. The old order would either evolve or crumble. The response from the Galactic Accord was swift, yet futile. The ancient empires, too proud to bend, refused to acknowledge the new order that humanity had brought to the galaxy. They saw humanity's rise as a threat to their centuries-old dominance, and they believed that their military power and political influence could crush it, as they had done with countless other civilizations before. But this time, things were different. Humanity's presence, once a quiet shadow in the galaxy, had grown into something formidable. The coalition that humanity had built was not merely a collection of ships or colonies. It was a united front of worlds, each with its own strengths, resources, and innovations, all tied together by the ideals humanity had fought for: freedom, independence, and progress. Humanity's strength did not lie in sheer numbers or firepower. It lay in their ability to adapt, to innovate, and to inspire those around them. The first sign that the Accord's military response would be a disaster came when the unified fleet of human and breakaway worlds encountered the forces sent by the galactic powers. The galaxy's oldest fleets, the ones that had once ruled with an iron fist, faced an entirely new kind of warfare. Humanity had revolutionized not just the technology of war, but the very strategies of conflict. They employed quantum warfare, sending encrypted, self-replicating codes through the galactic communication networks, rendering enemy systems useless within moments. No longer relying on brute force, human fleets launched rapid, precise strikes against the Accord's supply lines and command hubs. The strategy was surgical, calculated, and above all, effective. The galactic powers had never seen anything like it. Their once imposing fleets were caught off guard, crippled by the very technology they had once dismissed as impossible. On the ground, the breakaway worlds, now empowered by human technology, joined the fight in ways the old powers could not have predicted. Resistance movements in every corner of the galaxy rose, fueled by the promise of a better future. They no longer had to rely on the oppressive rules of the Accord. The message was clear. The old empires were no longer the galaxy's unquestioned rulers. The galaxy was changing. The Accord's response was to double down, to throw more of their fleets and resources into the conflict. But it was too late. The balance had already tipped. Each battle they fought only served to expose the cracks in their fragile empire. The power structures that had held the galaxy together for so long were no longer effective in the face of humanity's ingenuity and the growing alliances they had formed. The Accord's once great fleets were shattered, their command structures in disarray. The galaxy, it seemed, was no longer content to be governed by the same old powers. It was a turning point, the moment when the old world order began to fall apart. The galaxy had shifted, and humanity was at the center of that shift. They had proven that their survival was not a fluke, that their ideas were not just hopeful dreams, but the path forward. The collapse of the old order had begun, and with it came the dawn of something entirely new. The galaxy was no longer the same. Humanity had not only survived, they had reshaped the future. The once unimaginable had become reality. The old empires of the Galactic Accord had crumbled under the weight of their own arrogance, and humanity stood at the helm of a new era. The galaxy was no longer divided by centuries of old feuds and power struggles. The lessons of the past had been learned, and the time for new leadership had arrived. The leaders of the Accord, their empires shattered and their fleets defeated, had no choice but to acknowledge the inevitable. There would be no return to the way things were. The galaxy had changed forever, and the humans, with their innovative spirit and unyielding determination, had been the catalyst. But the humans did not seek domination, they sought progress. A galaxy united under the banner of cooperation, equality, and shared prosperity. In the aftermath of the battles, as the dust settled and the remnants of the old order lay in ruin, the leaders of humanity convened with the leaders of the breakaway worlds. A new council was formed, not one dominated by power-hungry empires, but one built on collaboration. The foundation of the new galaxy was laid with the goal of ensuring that no species would ever again be silenced or oppressed. Humanity's representatives, led by a diverse group of diplomats, engineers, scientists, and visionaries, put forth a new vision for the galaxy. It was a vision of shared knowledge, mutual respect, and boundless opportunity. Technology, once hoarded by the elite, was now freely shared among all, with the promise of advancement for every species. Human innovations in energy, medicine, and transportation became the cornerstone of the new era, lifting even the most impoverished worlds to new heights. But this new galaxy was not without challenges. The old guard of the Accord, although defeated, were not easily forgotten. Some still sought power in the shadows, plotting to regain control. But humanity had learned the value of vigilance. The new council was structured not just to promote peace, but to ensure that no species, no matter how powerful, would ever dominate the galaxy again. It was a balance that humanity would safeguard with wisdom and foresight. As the days turned to years, the galaxy flourished. Trade routes reopened, cultural exchanges thrived, and new alliances were formed. No longer divided by the narrow interests of empires, the galaxy embraced its diversity. The barriers between species, once rigid and insurmountable, began to dissolve as cooperation replaced mistrust. The once distant hope for a united galaxy had been realized, and it was humanity that had paved the way. The legacy of Earth was no longer one of isolation or extinction. It was a legacy of resilience, of unity in the face of adversity, and of the unshakable belief that the future could always be better. The galaxy had been reshaped, not through conquest, but through the enduring power of human spirit and creativity. And as the stars sparkled above, the galaxy, once fractured and torn by the old powers, now stood together, under the shared banner of progress. The dawn of a new era had arrived, and humanity had shown the galaxy that, no matter how long it took, the consequences of crossing humanity would always be galactic.